The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. Cameras were rolling, reporters had their pens poised, and everyone was waiting for what was supposed to be just another routine hearing. But then, she spoke. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her fierce intellect and unshakable calm, rose from her seat. There was a stillness in her movement, but an unmistakable fire in her eyes. She wasn't there to make noise. She was there to make history. Her tone was respectful, her delivery poised, but the energy behind her words was electric. You could feel the room tighten as she began. Justice is not silence, it's courage, and courage isn't always convenient. That single line rippled through the air. Several heads turned. Even the justices, who were trained to remain expressionless, glanced up from their notes. Reporters stopped typing. Something in her voice demanded attention, not because it was loud, but because it was true. And that's when it happened, the moment that would make headlines across every major network in the country. As Jasmine began to challenge a controversial legal interpretation, Justice Samuel Alito leaned forward, his face hardened, his tone sharp. "Congresswoman, you are out of line." The entire courtroom gasped. The energy shifted instantly, the kind of shift you can feel in your chest, a mix of shock, tension, and disbelief. Every camera in the room zoomed in. Every microphone caught the edge in his voice. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She blinked once, slowly, then lifted her gaze toward the bench. Her voice remained steady, calm, but cutting like a blade wrapped in silk. "Out of line," she repeated, her eyebrow arching slightly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, maybe the line needs to move." A few quiet murmurs filled the room. Even the court officers looked up, uncertain whether they had just witnessed defiance or brilliance. Justice Alito's eyes hardened. "This is not a debate hall, Congresswoman. You are expected to conduct yourself with decorum." Her response was immediate, not rushed, not defensive, but deliberate. "I agree, Your Honor. And with that same decorum, I must ask, when did truth start needing permission?" The words echoed. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to hesitate. It was one of those moments when time feels like it slows down, when a single sentence holds more power than 100 speeches. Alito sat back, visibly caught off guard. It wasn't defiance he saw. It was conviction, pure, fearless conviction. Jasmine continued her remarks. Her tone never rose, her hands never trembled. She spoke with the kind of confidence that doesn't come from arrogance, but from clarity, from knowing that her purpose was bigger than protocol. She talked about justice not as a performance, but as a promise made to people who often never get to stand in rooms like this, a promise that the powerful will be questioned, that fairness will be defended, even when it's uncomfortable. "Justice," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "isn't about who speaks louder. It's about who listens better." That final line landed like thunder in the silence. Even Justice Alito didn't respond immediately. For a moment, he simply looked at her, and for the first time, his expression softened. You could almost feel it, the weight of understanding settling in. It wasn't defiance he had just witnessed. It was bravery. When Jasmine finally took her seat, there was no applause. There didn't need to be. The silence spoke louder than any cheer ever could. Reporters quickly typed away, their hands shaking with excitement. Within minutes, clips of the exchange began circulating online. Headlines appeared almost instantly. Congresswoman Crockett stands tall against Justice Alito, the line that silenced the Supreme Bench. Crockett's calm courage shakes the court. Millions watched the video, millions more shared it. But what made it viral wasn't anger, it was admiration. They saw grace under pressure. They saw a woman refuse to be intimidated by power and instead redefine it. Commentators called it a master class in composure. One even said she didn't raise her voice, she raised the standard. And for once, the internet agreed. In that courtroom, something extraordinary happened. Power met principle. Authority met authenticity. And when Justice Alito tried to silence her, Jasmine Crockett didn't fight back with volume. She answered with truth. That's why her final line didn't just make the courtroom gasp. It made the world listen.
Alito leaned forward, clearly expecting her to back down. He had interrupted countless speakers before, senators, lawyers, even senior officials. It was part of his authority, part of his command over the courtroom. But this time, something was different. This time, the interruption didn't silence the moment. It amplified it. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, like she had been preparing her whole life for this exact second. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't show a hint of nervousness. She simply repeated his words, but with a tone that flipped the entire power dynamic. "Out of line," she said, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "With all due respect, Your Honor, maybe the line needs to move." You could almost hear the shift in the air. A low murmur spread across the audience. Even the clerks at the back exchanged glances, unsure whether to be shocked or impressed. Justice Alito frowned, his tone sharpening. "This is not a debate hall, Congresswoman. You are to present your remarks with decorum." But Jasmine didn't hesitate. Her voice was calm, almost surgical in its precision. "I agree, Your Honor. And with the same decorum, I must ask, when did truth start needing permission?" And just like that, the courtroom froze. For a moment, no one dared to move. No one even breathed. It was the kind of silence that only follows when someone says something so true, so unfiltered that it cut straight through the noise. Every camera focused in on her face. Every reporter's pen stopped mid-air. You could even hear the faint hum of the lighting above as everyone realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Justice Alito leaned back slightly, perhaps caught off guard. He had faced criticism before, but never like this. Never from someone who could look him dead in the eye and speak truth without trembling. Jasmine continued, her tone unwavering. "I came here today to discuss justice, Your Honor, not comfort. Justice doesn't live in silence. It doesn't wait for permission. It speaks even when it's inconvenient." Her words weren't loud, but they carried weight, a kind of moral gravity that filled the room. At that moment, even those who disagreed with her couldn't deny what they were seeing. Courage. Justice Alito cleared his throat, adjusting his papers, trying to regain control. "Your remarks are noted," he said curtly. "Please proceed." But everyone knew the tone had changed. Jasmine Crockett had shifted the balance in that courtroom, and everyone felt it. She went on to finish her statement, her voice steady, her words deliberate. She spoke about the importance of accountability, how authority should never become immunity, and how justice meant facing hard truths, not avoiding them. As she spoke, even the cameras seemed to zoom in closer, capturing not just her expression, but her energy, composed, fearless, and real. When she finally paused, she looked directly at Justice Alito again. "Your Honor," she said gently. Sometimes respect means asking the hard questions, especially when silence would be easier. No one moved. No one clapped. But the silence said everything. It wasn't rebellion they had witnessed. It was integrity. After a few seconds, Alito gave a small nod, the kind that wasn't official, but human, the kind that admitted in silence that her point had landed. Reporters began scribbling again. The tension slowly melted into awe. And when Jasmine finally sat down, it felt as if the air itself had changed. Outside, news anchors were already preparing their headlines. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were posted online. Justice Alito tries to silence Crockett, regrets it instantly. When did truth need permission? The line that shook the court. Calm, brave, unshakable, Jasmine Crockett dominates the hearing. The moment went viral in hours. Millions watched, replaying that same few seconds where a calm voice dismantled authority without ever raising a tone. Commentators called it a masterclass in confidence. Students called it the moment courage went viral. And ordinary viewers called it what it truly was: inspiring. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak truth to power that day. She reminded everyone watching that real strength doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller. And when Justice Alito tried to put her in line, she didn't fight back. She redrew the line entirely. That's why her final words didn't just echo in the courtroom. They echoed across the country. And maybe, just maybe, even Justice Alito heard them long after the camera stopped rolling.
Instead of backing down, Jasmine took a slow, deliberate breath. The entire courtroom watched. Every camera, every journalist, every person holding their breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes or rush to defend herself. She simply continued her statement, calm, clear, and composed. Her tone was firm but filled with empathy, the kind that silences noise without ever shouting over it. She began, "Justice is not a privilege that belongs to a few. It's a responsibility that belongs to all of us." The words floated across the courtroom, cutting through the tension that had built moments earlier when Justice Alito interrupted her. There was no trace of anger in her voice, only conviction. She spoke about how, for too long, justice had been treated like a trophy for the powerful, not a promise to the people. How those who spoke up, especially women and minorities, were too often dismissed as angry, unprofessional, or out of line. She didn't just make an argument, she painted a picture. "A person who fights for fairness," she said, "isn't angry. They're finally being heard. And when someone finally gets heard, it can sound loud to those who've never had to raise their voice." The courtroom was still. Even the sound of papers rustling had stopped. You could see reporters frozen in their seats, afraid to miss a single word. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was redefining what strength looked like in that courtroom. Her words carried something rare, not defiance, but grace under fire. "Justice," she continued, "isn't about politics or sides. It's about people. It's about recognizing that the law means nothing if it doesn't protect the least powerful among us." Her tone softened, but her message only grew stronger. "And when the people who are unheard start speaking, the system shouldn't silence them. It should listen." Every sentence landed like a quiet explosion. Even Justice Alito, known for his sharp composure, seemed to lean back, listening more intently now. His expression,
once stern and commanding, began to shift ever so slightly. When Jasmine finally paused, it wasn't out of hesitation. It was deliberate, a silence that made everyone hang on to her next words. Then, with complete calm, she turned slightly toward the bench and said, "Justice isn't about who speaks louder. It's about who listens better." The words dropped into the silence like thunder after lightning. It wasn't just a statement. It was a truth that demanded reflection. For the first time in years, Justice Alito didn't respond immediately. There was no gavel slam, no retort, no cold dismissal. Instead, there was something no one had expected. A pause. A long, thoughtful pause. Even he seemed to realize that something deeper had just been said, something that wasn't about politics or pride, but principle. You could almost see it in his face, the recognition that leadership doesn't always mean control. Sometimes it means humility. And in that moment, a strange kind of balance filled the room. Reporters lowered their pens. The audience sat in complete awe. The air that once felt heavy now carried quiet respect. When Jasmine finally stepped back from the podium, there was no applause. Not because she didn't deserve it, but because no one wanted to break the moment. It was sacred, one of those rare times when truth stands taller than titles. Justice Alito adjusted his glasses, nodded faintly, and said in a low tone, "Your remarks are noted, Congresswoman." It wasn't much, but everyone knew what it meant. It meant she had been heard. As Jasmine took her seat, the camera zoomed in, capturing her calm expression, the faint but confident smile of someone who had just changed the tone of the entire room. Within minutes, the clip hit the internet. Justice isn't about who speaks louder, the line that silenced the court. Jasmine Crockett redefines courage in front of Justice Alito. Power meets poise, and poise wins. Millions watched. Comment sections flooded with praise. People called it the calmest mic drop in history. But for Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't about going viral. It was about proving one simple truth, that real power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from standing taller, speaking clearer, and listening deeper. And that day, in one of the most powerful rooms in America, everyone, even Justice Alito, learned that lesson.
The room was heavy with silence, the kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath, every heartbeat. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, the soft click of her heels echoing faintly as she shifted her weight and took a slow, steady breath. Every camera in the courtroom was locked on her, every eye fixed, waiting to see how she'd react after Justice Alito's interruption. Most people, under that kind of pressure, would have faltered. They would have raised their voice, gotten defensive, or let anger take over. But Jasmine wasn't most people. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't meet sharpness with sharpness. Instead, she spoke, calmly, clearly, and powerfully. Her tone was steady, like a calm sea hiding powerful waves beneath the surface. Her every word carried weight, and the more she spoke, the more the courtroom leaned in. "Justice," she began softly, "isn't a privilege owned by a few. It's a promise to everyone." The sentence landed like a quiet explosion. Reporters' pens froze mid-air. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't look away. She continued, "It's not supposed to be political. It's not supposed to be convenient. It's supposed to be fair." Jasmine paused for a moment, letting her words sink in.
Then, with that same unshakable calm, she said something that changed the tone of the entire hearing. Too often, when people fight for fairness, they're called angry, loud, emotional. But maybe, she said, her voice deepening slightly, maybe they're not angry. Maybe they're just finally being heard. A ripple of quiet murmurs passed through the courtroom. Even the clerks at the back exchanged glances. Justice Alito's eyes, once sharp and unbothered, narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in focus. Jasmine didn't stop there. Her words began to carry rhythm, not rehearsed, but real. When you've been ignored long enough, your truth starts to sound like noise to those who've never had to shout. But that doesn't make the truth any less true. It wasn't just a speech anymore. It was something deeper. You could feel the emotion build, the quiet strength that comes from someone who's fought too hard to be dismissed. She looked around the courtroom, at the cameras, at the audience, at the bench, and continued, "Justice isn't about power. It's about principle. It's not about silencing those who speak up. It's about asking why they had to in the first place." And by now, no one dared to interrupt her. The judge's gavel, usually quick to demand order, stayed still. The air itself seemed to bend toward her words. Then Jasmine did something small but unforgettable. She took a step forward, her voice now just above a whisper, yet every syllable reached the farthest corner of the room. "When people say I'm out of line, I think maybe the line was drawn in the wrong place." You could almost hear hearts skip. Reporters' cameras clicked in a frenzy, trying to capture the moment. Even Justice Alito, known for his unshakable authority, didn't speak. His hands rested on the bench, still. Then Jasmine paused again, drew in a quiet breath, and looked directly at him. Her tone was neither harsh nor pleading. It was honest. Justice isn't about who speaks louder. It's about who listens better. The line hit like thunder after lightning, sudden, electrifying, impossible to ignore. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Even the air seemed to wait for what would happen next. Justice Alito's expression softened. Not much, but enough for everyone to notice. His shoulders eased, and his eyes shifted, almost reflecting a hint of understanding. He didn't respond right away. That in itself said everything. For a man known for sharp retorts and control of every courtroom he entered, the pause was louder than words. Jasmine slowly stepped back from the podium, the weight of the moment still hanging in the air. A faint murmur started in the audience, a quiet mix of disbelief and admiration. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Some spectators just stared, realizing they had witnessed something rare. A moment when truth didn't shout, but it still shook the room. Even those who disagreed with her, those who had rolled their eyes at her earlier remarks, couldn't deny what had just happened. Jasmine Crockett had taken a tense confrontation and turned it into a masterclass in composure. She hadn't won with anger. She had won with grace. And in that courtroom, filled with cameras, critics, and power, she proved something timeless, that real strength isn't about volume, but vision. As she sat down, her hands folded neatly, the cameras kept flashing, the room still buzzing with quiet awe. Justice Alito, still watching her, gave a small nod, barely noticeable, but real. And at that moment, everyone in that room, every reporter, every viewer at home, knew one thing. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just spoken. She had been heard.
Days had passed since the courtroom moment that left the nation talking, but the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's words still lingered everywhere, on the news, across social media, and in conversations from law schools to living rooms. Clips of her calm yet commanding response were replayed millions of times. Some called her brave, others called her defiant. But one thing was certain: she had made people think. So when Justice Samuel Alito finally agreed to speak publicly about the exchange, the world watched closely. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and everyone waited to hear whether he would defend his interruption or dismiss the viral moment as overblown. But what he said next shocked everyone. Sitting across from the interviewer, Justice Alito's tone was calm, reflective even. "Sometimes," he began slowly, "in our search for order, we forget that truth doesn't always speak softly." He paused, the corners of his mouth turning slightly upward. "The Congresswoman reminded me of that." The words were few, but they carried enormous weight. Within minutes, headlines flashed everywhere. Justice Alito responds with grace. From tension to understanding, a moment of growth. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about what happens when two powerful voices from opposite ends of the spectrum actually listen to each other. For Jasmine Crockett, the attention was overwhelming. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls and messages. But instead of riding the wave of fame, she did something unexpected. She reflected. A few nights later, she shared her thoughts on social media. It wasn't a fiery statement or a victory post. It was simple, honest, and deeply human. She wrote, "I wasn't trying to win an argument. I was trying to open a door. Justice doesn't need silence. It needs honesty." Within hours, the post had gone viral. Thousands of people commented, saying her words reminded them of what leadership was supposed to look like. Not shouting, not blaming, but standing up with clarity and compassion. Even those who had criticized her earlier admitted they respected her grace. One top journalist tweeted, "This is how disagreement should end, with reflection, not resentment." And just when the story seemed to be fading, something remarkable happened. Weeks later, Jasmine Crockett and Justice Alito appeared together on stage at a public forum on democracy and civility. No one expected that to happen. Two people who had once clashed in a courtroom, now sitting side by side, sharing a microphone and talking about respect. The audience was packed. Every seat was filled. The audience included students, judges, lawmakers, and ordinary citizens who wanted to witness what many were calling a rare moment of unity in divided times. As the moderator asked about their viral exchange, Jasmine smiled politely and glanced at Alito. "That day taught me something, that the loudest room isn't always the most powerful. It's the one where people finally hear each other." Her words earned a wave of applause. Justice Alito nodded, his expression thoughtful. When it was his turn to speak, he said, "I may not always agree with every tone or argument, but I respect anyone who speaks with conviction and heart. That's what democracy depends on, the courage to speak and the humility to listen." The audience stood up in applause. Cameras flashed. It was the kind of moment that felt bigger than politics. It felt like progress. Later that night, television hosts called it one of the most uplifting exchanges in recent history. Clips from the event flooded every platform. People around the world shared the moment, tagging it with captions like, "Strength meets respect," and "This is what leadership looks like." It wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett's courage anymore, or Justice Alito's reflection. It had become a story of transformation,
about how confrontation, handled with integrity, could turn into connection. Even schools began using the clip to teach debate and civics classes. Teachers played the video to show students how disagreements don't have to end in division. They can lead to understanding if both sides listen. For both Jasmine and Justice Alito, that single courtroom encounter had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. It had become a reminder that power isn't about control or dominance. It's about empathy, about finding the strength to listen even when every instinct tells you to fight back. And perhaps that's why one reporter ended her segment that night with a line that perfectly captured the spirit of it all. In that courtroom, attitude didn't meet authority, it met empathy. And the result was unforgettable. As the credits rolled on the nightly news, that final image of Jasmine Crockett and Justice Alito shaking hands beneath the soft glow of the stage lights told the story better than any headline ever could. It was the image of two people who proved that even in the loudest debates, respect can still win.